Extension Office, and that's a really nice handout about culinary herbs and what to do with it. Like, for instance, how much dried herb is equivalent to how much fresh herb, how much to use in a particular recipe, what particular herbs go with what particular foods, which, for a lot of people who haven't grown up using herbs, they'll look at this herb in their garden and it may be growing really fantastic there for 2 years, but they never use it because they just simply don't know what to use it for and how, right? So this is a great handout for that. And we're not going to go really heavily into that. It's not the main focus of my class today. Yeah, you have the colorful version. I have the black and white version.
Okay.
I'm trying to save printer ink, so I always print black and white. But you got the colors. Anyway, it's called Using and Preserving Herbs. And that is always a fantastic reference for you to look. I would hang that in your kitchen on the fridge.
Could I get one of those?
You have it. It's the one you have in your hand right now.
Okay, this is the one that's this.
Yeah, it just looks colorful.
Color.
Mine looks black and white. It's the same thing.
We only saw two.
Yeah, and the other one, I was going to talk about the other one now. So, and this, they are on the table here. So please take one on the table. One of them is something that I have given out at a class before. I put this together years ago. You can see in 2013. Actually, I did it much earlier, but I revamped it in 2013. And it's called Herbal Preparations 101. This is basically all the different things that are commonly done with herbs for curative or medicine. I call it medicinal purposes, but a lot of it is kind of spa type of medicinal, you know what I mean? And that is something what we're going to do today. And a lot of these herbs, believe it or not, a lot of what we call medicinal herbs are also in the culinary herb category, because herbs don't know about our arbitrary divisions, that we say, oh, you're a medicinal herb and you're a culinary herb. The herbs don't care. They are just what they are, and they have culinary qualities and they have medicinal qualities, and they just have all kinds of different properties that we can use in so many different ways. So in this preparation, I originally had planned to make a salve, and then I looked at your schedule and I realized you already had a salve class before me by somebody else, and you already had a tincture class by somebody else, which are two things that I was considering doing. And I thought, well, what is another really fun thing that I could be doing? And then I thought, the most fun thing are like spa type of treatments, right? Which of course you can integrate real medicinal type of herbs too, but it's also something that you can do simply for fun. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, because a lot of things that we do simply for fun are highly therapeutic, even if we're not aware of it. So, and that's the category that the four things that we're going to talk about today falling into. They are considered spa treatments, really, but they are so highly beneficial for stress that I called it 4 underutilized herbal self-care practices. And I should have added for stress, but I didn't want to make the heading too long. So in the other one where it says Herbal Preparations 101, it's kind of an overview of all the things you can do. And there's one thing on there that I didn't add to my 4 spa care practices, simply because I only thought about it yesterday when I was in my garden and I saw these 2 plants. And I thought, you know what, these 2 plants, I don't really need. Somebody here may have use for them. And I can show you what you do with those. And then,
mullein?
No, this is comfrey. It looks a little similar to mullein, but mullein is more grayish in color. Okay, and the mullein has leaves that have rounded edges instead of pointed. So this is comfrey. It's not a native plant. These are both European weeds, but they have, naturalized in parts of the US wherever the conditions are ideal. Now, this is plantain, and a lot of people know that there's 2 types of plantain that have naturalized here. This is what's called the broadleaf plantain, And then there is a narrow leaf, also English plantain. They all have the same properties, but they look a little different. I prefer the broadleaf plantain because you get more material for your buck. You know what I mean? It's just so much easier to work with than the narrow leaf. But the other one has the same properties. The narrow leaf plantain is actually more widespread in Lake County. And that's simply because our climate is so harsh that everything that has small narrow leaves has a better chance to survive than a plant that has to make a big leaf, right? Because the climate is more conducive to small, narrow, hard things than big, luscious. That's just not who we are. But in the winter months, this looks really great. So I'm actually keeping one of these plants. I have them in a wine barrel with a couple other plants, and it looks 10 times as good as this because the one in the wine barrel gets watered, right? This one is just something that will grow, you know, like a weed by the roadside, and it kind of looks like that. So not very pretty, obviously, but if you plant it somewhere and water it, it'll get gorgeous, and the leaves will be like 5 times as big. The reason I brought it is because I thought somebody may want it. I also wanted to tell you that these are edible. The seeds of that are edible. They can be ground into a flour and added to any other edible seed flours. You can add them to your acorn bread or, you know, whatever you want to add them to. Like in a pinch, you can eat these. I'm not saying it's a culinary delicacy, but it is edible. And the whole herb is edible. Okay, you can throw some leaves in your smoothie. This herb, the reason why I brought it is both these herbs are kind of some of my favorites for making salve. So first, of course, I would make an herbal oil with it before I make a salve. And the way you make an herbal oil, you can see it on your general handouts, Preparation 101. And you've already learned it in the salve making class, I'm hoping and assuming.
You can go over it because there's some people that weren't here.
Just really briefly go over it. So the way you make a salve is first you make an herbal oil. And to make an herbal oil, we're not talking about an essential oil now. Essential oils are distilled, right? An herbal oil, you basically take the upper ground material of an herb, like the leaves usually, sometimes flower parts, but in this case, no, we have already seeds. You dry the leaves, and then you powder them a little bit, or just crush them when they're dried, and then you put them in a good quality olive oil. And you keep them in a dark place for a minimum of 2 weeks and shake the jar, preferably a couple times a day. That sounds cumbersome, right? So the way I deal with that, or I used to when I was still spending lots of time in the car driving every day, I used to put these dry herbs in oil in a brown paper bag so that it would be dark, and just put them in a little box in my car. And every day I drive around, those herbs would be shaken up in that oil all day long. And then after a couple of weeks, you can strain them, so you can save yourself a lot of work. Now, now I don't drive that much anymore, so now I have to put it in my kitchen and, and shake it. But if you put it on the kitchen counter where you see it, every time you go to the kitchen counter, it will shake. So, and I usually leave them in there 2 to 3 months instead of 2 weeks because they get much stronger. But 2 weeks would be the minimum that you would leave them in there. And if you really want to make it potent, you start at the new moon and you strain at the full moon. If that doesn't work out for you, don't sweat it. It's not like, a requirement. It's just to give it another little kick, But the main thing is really to add enough herb. Oh, that's one thing. And adding enough herb, I brought you this is an herbal vinegar, but it's the same principle. This is rosemary in vinegar. And, when people buy herbal oils, you get a bottle that's full of oil and then there's 1 sprig of rosemary in it. So people get this mistaken idea that the way you make an herbal oil is put 1 sprig of rosemary in a big bottle of oil. That 1 sprig of rosemary that you buy in that herbal oil is just for decoration.
Oh.
The herbal oil is made by putting that much into the oil. And then when you strain it out at the end of the maceration process, then you put 1 more sprig in just for decoration, so it's clear that it's rosemary.
So you know what kind of oil it is. Yeah.
Well, I usually use a good quality olive oil.
Yeah.
Okay, you could use other oils, but most other oils are either prohibitively expensive or just not very good quality. I would not use something like generic vegetable oil, you know what I mean? All these generic vegetable oils that you buy in the grocery store are deodorized, bleached, and have residues of solvents that have been used to extract the oil, which is usually hexanes that are highly toxic. So I would never use an oil like that to make a product like that. So buy a good quality olive oil. It doesn't have to be super, it doesn't have to be like, a bottle for $20 type of thing, but a decent quality olive oil will do. Where the oil itself is already something beneficial,
Is that like apple cider vinegar, or do you recommend a certain type of vinegar when you do that?
It does not matter. You can use any vinegar you like.
Okay.
I have actually used white distilled vinegar here simply so you can see what's in it.
Gotcha.
If I use apple cider vinegar, it's going to taste better, but it's going to look cloudy and you won't even be able to see.
Taste bitter or better?
Better.
Better.
It tastes better with apple cider vinegar, but it looks awful. That's why for show purposes, I usually use distilled vinegar so you can see the herbs clearer. But you could use any vinegar you have. I mean, you could use wine vinegar if you want or whatever.
So you say we add olive oil and vinegar together?
No.
Okay.
You can do
the only reason
either.
I show you this vinegar is because I didn't have an herbal oil that still had the plants in it at home right now. And I simply wanted to show you how much plant material you would put into the oil. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Same with the vinegar. So don't just put one sprig in there and think that's going to do anything. That'll do nothing,
Yeah.
So you need to put as much plant material in there as you can comfortably cover with liquid. And be aware that, because we're working with vinegar, you don't have to dry the herbs first. You use the fresh herbs.
Oh, okay. That was another question. Yeah.
The only reason we have to use dried herbs with oil, vinegar is basically a preservative. Because of the acidity, bacteria won't grow. That's why you can use fresh herbs.
Okay.
You won't grow bacteria. But if you put fresh herbs in oil, you will immediately have mold growing there and bacteria there. You could poison yourself. So that's why you only want to use dried herbs with oil so you don't have spoilage or mold growth, because that I guarantee you will happen, And so when you whether you make and that's what's called a tincture actually, and a tincture can be in alcohol, it can be in vinegar, or it could conceivably be in another menstruum. The liquid in which we make a tincture is technically called menstruum. You don't have to remember that. That's just herbalist techno speak. But the menstruum could be vinegar, alcohol, it could be glycerin. If you want to make a tincture for children that you don't want to give them alcohol, you would make a tincture in glycerin. Now the thing is, glycerin is not as good of a preservative as alcohol, and it's also not as good of a solvent as alcohol. So in a glycerin tincture, you get less of the herbal qualities, and it doesn't last as long as an alcoholic tincture. So when I would give a child an alcoholic tincture, I would simply put the amount of tincture you need in a cup, pour some hot water on it, and the alcohol will evaporate within a minute, and then you can give it to the children to drink, and it's a better product actually than the glyceride. But if you're, let's say you're traveling and you want to swig it directly out of the bottle, then it's probably a better idea to use glycerin. It also tastes better because glycerin tastes sweet.
Oh.
So anyway, where was I? Oh, herbal oil. I was talking about I got sidetracked real easy, as you can tell. So when you make your herbal oil, you would use a good quality olive oil and then put as much herbal material in there as you can fit in there and still have the material be under the oil. Now you will notice, because we're using dry material with oil, that dry material within the first 24 hours of adding it to the oil, a lot of dry materials soak up an immense amount of oil. So after 12 to 24 hours, you may notice that the material has soaked up all the oil and is now sticking out of the oil and getting dry on top. So you have to check the first 48 hours and add more oil as needed when you do that. Otherwise it will, when it sticks out of the oil, it will go bad. So not every herb does that. Rosemary doesn't do that because it has kind of a leathery coating, But mullein, as you mentioned, for instance, if you would do an herbal oil with mullein, when you dry mullein, it is so dry that once you rehydrate it with the oil, it soaks up enormous amounts of oil, and you would need to add, more oil within the first 48 hours. So then after your 14 days to 2-3 months or however long you leave it in the oil, you strain the material out. And the way I strain it out, I'm gonna quickly show you. I didn't bring my normal equipment because otherwise I would have to bring a truckload of stuff. But I basically take a bowl and I have a metal strainer that fits exactly into the bowl at home. And then into that metal strainer, I place what's called a flour sack towel. It's a white linen cloth that doesn't have the big gaps that cheesecloth has. You know, I don't recommend cheesecloth because it has such big holes. All the herbal material falls through. So this is just a white linen cloth, and I don't wash that with detergent or anything. I just wash it out in some vinegar and hot water. And I use it for nothing else but just for my herbal preparations. This is a fairly new one.
Yeah.
If I would have used it before, it would have herbal stains on it. That's normal, no big deal, right? But then in that bowl, with the strainer in the bowl, then I add the flour sack towel on top of it, and then I pour the whole enchilada in, and then you have this ball of oily herbs in there, and you have to really work hard. So you need a lot of hand strength to get all the goodness out of there, right? There is herbal presses that you can buy for a few $100s that work fantastic, but you know, I haven't, because I don't make enough material to make it worthwhile, and my hands are still strong enough that I actually don't need the herbal press. It's a good exercise. But for somebody who doesn't have a lot of hand strength, that might be a good idea. Some people have used potato risers. I have already broken 2 potato risers trying to do that, so I've given up on that method. So I just use my hands, you know. So then when you strain it out, you end up with this still slightly oily pulp. I throw it on my compost, you know. And then what's left over is the herbal oil. And then that herbal oil gets thickened with beeswax to make a salve out of it. This is not the salve class, so we're not going to go into details about that. The only thing I'd like to say about it is there is 3 ways to make a salve. Good, better, best. Okay? So for total beginners, what you usually see on Pinterest or on the internet is the okay method, you know? And it's basically to dump all the ingredients in a pot, heat it up, and by the time the wax is melted, you stir it and you fill it in your containers and you have your salve. That's okay. The only problem with that is that wax melts at 140 to 145 degrees. That's a fairly high temperature already. At that temperature, some of the herbal qualities in the herbal oil might already be going out the window. You know what I'm saying? So to get a better quality salve, you heat up the wax and the oil separate. You heat up the wax in one pot till it melts, which will be about between 140 and 145 degrees. And then you heat up your oil in your herbal oil in a separate pot really gently to just 120 degrees, no more than that, okay, to preserve the medicinal qualities of the oil. And then once the oil is 120 degrees and the melted wax has cooled down to, let's say, 135, then you mix them quickly, maybe add a couple of essential oils and then fill them into your jars. Remember, any product that contains essential oils should not be put in a plastic container.
Yeah.
If you've ever put a drop of essential oil on plastic, you'll see it will eat that plastic up in front of your eyes. So, if you put, you know, a product that has a lot of essential oils in it in a plastic container, it'll dissolve part of the plastic container, and you don't want to have that in your product. So I use either preferably glass jars. There's also these little metal salve tins that work okay. If you don't use a lot of essential oil, the metal salve tins are also fine.
Are those usually aluminum?
They are tin, I believe,
yeah.
and I'm not a huge fan of it. If I have a significant amount of essential oils in my product, I would not use that either. I would use only glass containers. But if it's just an herbal oil with beeswax, relatively non-reactive, then you can put it in one of those, you know, metal or plastic container. I don't recommend, because when you pour the herbal oil, it's still fairly hot. And pouring something hot into a plastic container is never a great idea, you know? So anyway, that's about these plants. They are 2 of my favorite salve and herbal oil making plants. Calendula would be a third one, and unfortunately they're not growing at this time of the year. They have long given up, but I'm starting them again for fall now. So anybody who wants these plants, you can take them home. Yeah, take it. I decided I do not want to take them home. I have plenty at home.
Yay.
So, that was just on the side. That was actually not something I was planning to do today, so now we're going to the regular program. But it's a little add-on, okay? So today I wanted to focus on 4 underutilized herbal self-care practices. One of them is something, they're actually all really simple things that anybody with zero herbal experience can do. One thing is something that I've grown up with as a kid. My dad always made us do that, and we hated it when I was a kid because he always put extra menthol in it, which, you know, kind of burns the inside of your mouth. So gargling with herbal tea. You all know how to gargle, right? So gargling with herbal tea is highly beneficial, especially if you're in a time when you think you might come down with some type of respiratory or throat infection. And you know, one of the best and most easiest available herbal teas for gargling is a mixture of sage. And sage has some, you know, mildly disinfectant properties and astringent properties. And I would add an antiviral herb to that, which I don't have with me right now. I forgot. You all know what lemon balm looks like, right? Lemon balm is an antiviral. That's something you might want to add to your gargle tea. This is just a tea that I made for the foot bath, but it would also be a good gargle tea, and I want you to smell it. That is Cleveland sage and rosemary. So take a good whiff and just kind of pass it around. It's a pretty concentrated, and this tea has made sort of as a something between an infusion and a decoction. On your 101 sheet, it tells you the difference between infusions and decoctions, but I'm going to mention it briefly again. An infusion is basically when you have the herbal material and you just pour boiling water over it and let it steep for anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour or longer. That would be an infusion. And the infusion is usually used with all herbal material that's fairly soft, that is releasing its properties relatively easily in hot water. We make infusions. We also commonly call them herbal teas, right? The technical term is infusion, though. And a decoction is something you would make with herbal material that's much more, you know, robust, where pouring boiling water over it will not extract enough of the good properties. Like, I brought you a couple of examples here. This particular this is between an infusion and a decoction. A decoction is made by simmering harder material anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Not really boiling vigorously, but just, you know, ever so slightly bubble simmering and then straining. Then you have a decoction. And what's in this tea is rosemary, which happens to be blooming right now. Really pretty, right? Take a little whiff. And the other thing I put in there is Cleveland sage. I want to pass that around. It's a really strong smelling native sage here that grows exceedingly well in the garden, even in the heat of the summer. And a tiny bit of thyme. I actually didn't put much thyme in there because I made this tea in the morning when it was so dark I couldn't find the thyme. So it's mostly Cleveland sage and rosemary. And then I grabbed more thyme later before I left, so just so you see, this is thyme. That's what I would have liked to put in there if I could have found it, right? The Cleveland sage is a wonderful plant to make tea out of, and you can make a sage pesto out of it after you make your tea.
Nice.
That thing is much too intense tasting to grind it up as pesto as it is, as you can imagine, right? But after you made your tea, you fish your herbs out of the tea, and then they have lost that pungency, and that's when it's the perfect time to make a pesto out of it, and it goes really well with poultry. Really good. Yeah. And So this is the Cleveland sage, and this is the regular garden sage.
Okay, that's what we have over at the clinic, huh?
So you could use that too. Any sage pretty much will work for this foot bath that we're gonna do with it.
Oh yeah.
So these are the herbs.
Yeah.
May I have one of your, the 4 deal? I didn't get one of them.
They're
not over there.
back.
They're not.
It's in the
It's
back.
it's
It's
on the
back
back.
page.
Sorry.
It's on the back page.
Here,
you find it?
Oh, I did. Sorry.
Okay. Good. But you all know how to do that. And how often would you? So when you make a gargle, you make it stronger than you would make it to drink. Do you know what I'm saying? This is a little too strong for drinking because it's meant for a foot bath or a gargle. So the strength of the preparation depends on what you're going to do with it. This is like unpleasantly strong for drinking. Of course, you could simply dilute it with more water for drinking. You know, that would be the easiest way to deal with it. But for a gargle, it's got the perfect strength. And for a gargle, you want to have it fairly warm. Doesn't have to be, but fairly warm. Because the warm tea will open up the pores in the inside of your mouth and allow those, herbal properties to go in there. So it has a mild, astringent, and disinfecting.
You can swallow it though.
You can swallow it. Oh, yeah.
So
Of course you can swallow it. I'm just saying, for drinking in larger quantities, it's a little strong.
Yeah.
But you can totally swallow it. There's nothing in it. Whereas, my dad always made us gargle with that, and he put a lot of menthol in it, so you couldn't swallow that because it was disgusting tasting, right? But, it still had some beneficial effect, obviously. Other things I was going to mention about sage. Where did the sage go?
Right here.
Yeah, it's around that sage and the other sage.
There's
Sage
the other
has one of the interesting properties of sages. It inhibits perspiration. Okay, so that's why it often gets added to natural deodorants. It'll stop you from, not completely stop you, but it will greatly inhibit perspiration. And that's why it's a great ingredient in a foot bath if you happen to have hot, sweaty feet. This is a great ingredient in a foot bath.
I will tell that to my boys.
You can even put some leaves in their shoes when they're not looking, right?
What about if you eat it? Is it just as good if you eat it?
Yeah, well, make a tea out of it.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
you can make a pesto out of it, or
Oh, okay.
Now, once you make the pesto out of the stuff that you have already made tea out of, obviously it doesn't have that many medicinal qualities anymore, but then it's tasty, then it's not so strong. And you add the other stuff that you would add to a pesto, maybe some lemon, maybe some Parmesan cheese, whatever else you want to add to it. So you can, and to gargle, you want to add a little bit of salt, because salt also has a disinfecting quality when you make a gargle. Add just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt for your cup of gargle, and you can make enough gargle ahead for 3 days. Then you're more likely to do it. Just make, a whole thing like that and put it in the fridge, and then you just take 1/3 of it out every day and gargle. And do it like 3 times, and spit it out, and 2 more times, right? If you really think you're coming down with something, just take this with you and gargle whenever you think about it. And you can hold it in your mouth too, like you would do an oil pulling oil. You just keep it in your mouth, And the herbs you can add, sage, rosemary, thyme, lavender, elderflower, lemon balm, any of these herbs. They're mostly culinary herbs, but they also have beneficial medicinal properties. So you can gargle them, and then with the rest of it, you can eat it. Throw it in your soup, whatever. The next thing, the second really simple thing is, and I'm gonna have Sonia demonstrate. We're gonna make a forehead and eye compress, and that's something that is super beneficial. Just sit down here for a minute.
Okay.
It's super simple. When you're really stressed out, this does miracles for you. It looks like such a super simple thing, but it actually has a much more powerful effect than you would expect. So that's why. So all you need is a washcloth and some herbal tea. And where did I put the herbal tea for the? So for this particular one, I'm using a tea made from chamomile and lavender, because here you want to use some relaxing herbs for the stress busting eye compress. Rosemary and sage are more stimulating, invigorating. That's not what you want to put on there when you want to relax. So this may be a little too hot. We may have to add some, because this thermos keeps things really hot. We'll see. Yeah, you can see it's almost boiling.
It's steaming.
Here you can smell, that's chamomile lavender. You can pass it around. So yeah, that's a bit on the hot side. Yeah. I don't
But you
want to
do
burn
want it
your
warm,
forehead.
right?
Huh?
You do want it warm.
You could
though.
do it cold too. If it's like a 117-degree day like we had, then I would definitely do this cold. You know, on a cool morning, I would do it hot. If you're hot, do it cold. There's no
Wrong, right way.
there's no wrong or right temperature to do this. Do the temperature that you like. I just did it hot because it was cool this morning when I left, and I thought, oh, it would be nice to have a whole. Now I'm thinking it would be nice to have a cold one, right? But so you make a pretty strong herbal tea. You know, this is like double strength than what I would drink. For all these external applications, I usually use double strength than what I would use for drinking. And then you don't want to get rid of all the water in there, just kind of, or tea in there. I'm gonna give you a towel so we don't get it all over.
Yeah, I was
your-
thinking.
Drape that across your chest so we're not drooling.
Drooling?
Yeah, so we're not getting you all.
Smart.
Actually, let's
That's
do
not too
this.
good.
Yeah. So you just use a clean washcloth, and of course we need a chair where you can lean your head back and all that. We don't have that, but so that's a little bit too much tea in there.
It's okay.
Okay, so hang on. And lean your head against my chest.
There we go.
Yeah, there. So you can do this together with your husband, wife, or
Can you
partner,
do it
or
when you
can
go
just
to
do it
bed?
alone, It
I
doesn't
know.
matter.
Can you?
So there's several things at work here. Number one, it's just the fact that you're taking the time to relax that's beneficial. So the herbs are giving you an excuse to take the time to relax. Number two is the beneficial properties of the herbs themselves. Chamomile and lavender are very calming herbs. And the third thing that's in play here is we're hitting two acupressure points here on the forehead that are two relaxing acupressure points that I'm going to show you when I take the thing off. So we have a triple whammy relaxing effect here. And then if you want, you can play some relaxing music while you're doing this. And really the best thing would be to do the foot bath at the same time, right? Which is what we're gonna go to next.
Good.
It's good, huh? Yeah, I know, it's really, it's such a simple thing that people think, oh, well, what would that possibly do? But it's not true at all. Sometimes it's the simplest things that have really powerful effects. This is a great stress buster. It's also really great with cold water, even with ice cold water or tea. If you don't have any tea, just use water and salt. It's already beneficial,
How about if you're sleeping? Can you just rest all the way, or you want it to be in that position?
I didn't get the first part.
If you're sleeping, can you do that, or you
Of
want
course, you can do that. I mean, you don't want to get your bed wet with tea, but you can put towels underneath or something. It's a great way to fall asleep, And that, I'm going to slowly get you back upright. I know you're probably going to want to stay there, but this is just for demonstration purposes. In reality, you would stay there for like at least 10, 15 minutes, right? But we don't have that much time right now, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to slowly get you back up. Nice,
Very
huh?
nice. Very nice.
Yeah, this is much nicer than you would think. And so foot bath at the same time would be ideal. And the way you do that, also very simple. Hang on. I've got more stuff here. Now that might also be too warm because these thermoses. So all you need is a little tub like that. You can even use a big pot. Doesn't really matter. And I have this tea in here. Okay, this is our foot bath tea. Only I have a whole thermos full. So let's pour that in. We're probably not going to need a lot out of there. It's a beautiful color.
Yeah.
let's just open it up.
So aren't most of the herbs and stuff also antiviral, or is it just like certain
No.
ones, lemon balm and
Most of the herbs are not antiviral. It's actually only a few.
well, how about oregano and thyme?
Yeah, oregano has some, but thyme is mostly antibacterial.
Okay.
Oregano is antibacterial and antiviral.
Okay.
But of course, again, now what you need to keep in mind with that, it's also a dosage thing. Don't think just because you put a little bit of oregano in your food that you're going to have an antiviral now. It's not like a medication where after one pill, you know,
Yeah.
you need to
Or one
consume a
salad you're
significant amount if you want to have that effect. Now this is pretty hot. But we have cold water here to dilute it. Hang on. That's too hot. Yeah, way too hot. Where's the cold water hose? Over there. Hang on.
Okay. Help?
Oh no, I got it. Much too hot.
We have a bunch of this at the garden. This sage.
What variety is
I don't know. This
She said it
is
was
a
common. It grows a
regular
lot of-
common Cleveland sage. I think
I don't know why it's so foamy.
Oh, that's okay.
It's only
Test it first. See,
antibacterial.
that's a good temperature.
Give it a name. She just said.
All right.
Oh wow, that looks good.
I know.
It's a nice red tea, and so
Also,
you
I'm
would
gonna
do
start
the
sweating though.
you could do the compress at the. Well, this has
Yeah.
sage and rosemary in it, so
Uh-huh.
it's sort of an anti-sweat tea,
Oh, okay.
right? Because of the sage.
Yeah. So what kind of sage is this?
This is regular garden sage.
Garden sage.
But the sage that's in the tea is Cleveland sage.
It's this
Okay.
that is
Like this one.
It's that one, yeah. But you could have used the garden sage, same purpose. So that doesn't make any difference. These two sages have very similar properties. So that is your foot bath, and even though as well it's just a foot bath, this is not for cleaning your feet. Obviously, you want to clean your feet before you stick them in that foot bath, right?
Yes.
Because you may know this, that we can absorb a lot of stuff through our hands and our foot soles. This is beside the subject, but there's a lot of external application of essential oils that you can really only put on the foot sole, right? Because it's too strong for any other part of your skin. So the foot soles can take things on the skin that other parts of our skin cannot handle, but they absorb incredible amounts of stuff. I used to have a client years ago in LA that had so many stomach and intestinal problems. She could not take tinctures internally because they would burn her stomach, burn her bladder, whatnot. And she had menstrual and PMS problems. So I would use my PMS tonic, which was a tincture, and massage it into her foot soles. And literally within like a few hours, you could feel the effect. It had gone from her foot sole into the system. So you can absorb beneficial things through your foot sole. Of course, it also goes the other way around. You can also absorb non-beneficial things through your foot sole. So keep that in mind, right? So ideally, you want to wash your feet well. I love foot bath. I do a foot bath like that at least twice a week.
Wow.
First of all, yeah, I work in the garden a lot. I like to walk around in sandals, so my feet get really callousy and dirty. So a minimum of twice a week, I take a foot bath, and I first do the soapy thing with callus remover, you know, like basalt rock. I scrub my foot soles down, and then when they're nice and clean and the pores are actually open, then you do the herbal bath, so your foot soles can absorb the benefit. And then I'm ready to go to bed, right? So that's a nice ritual to do after a long day of work in the garden, and you can absorb the properties of the herbs through your feet. So
And bad stuff can be drawn out through there too, yeah?
things can be drawn out through that. It goes both ways. You know, it goes both ways. Our skin is an eliminatory organ. It can take things in and it pushes things out via the sweat, obviously, right? So we've done the foot bath, the forehead compress, the herbal salt glow. I'm not going to demonstrate that. now because that's kind of messy, but I have another messy, more fun thing for you. But the herbal salt glow is just another thing like that. Basically what you're doing, you're combining sea salt, powdered herbs, and oil, and it's a scrub that you're making, okay? It's incredibly invigorating, and it's sort of like a cold shower type of invigorating, you know? So if you're really in a bad mood, or you need a total mental reset, okay? Like mental, emotional reset type of mood, that would be a good time to do an herbal salt glow. It's quite powerful. You want to rinse that off really good because salt, you know, is drawing moisture out of your skin. So if you don't rinse that off well, it's not good for your skin. It's not good for your skin. So you scrub it on, you leave it on only a brief period of time, and you rinse it off really well and take some rest afterwards, because actually it has a powerful effect on your body and you will need some rest afterwards. Now, one thing I want to caution you, do not do this in your bathtub, especially if you are not well balanced. Because this salt glow, because there's oil in it, makes the bathtub slippery and you can hurt yourself really badly. So do not do this in your bathtub, right? A good place to do that is out in the garden, you know, where you have grass or something to rinse it off into. Do it under your favorite tree that needs more water and just rinse it off under the tree so you have a ground to walk on where you cannot lose your balance if you have oily feet. One last thing that's not on this list, but it's on the general list, is poultices. Poultices are completely underused technique. Hardly anybody uses it anymore. And it's a little bit like a compress, except, it is a compress, a poultice. It's basically the same thing, right? But instead of just, you can either just dip the cloth into a tea and apply it to the body that way, as just in a stress busting thing. Now, if you have a real issue, let's say you just got bitten by a bee or stung by a bee or bitten by a scorpion or something like that, and you need something more than just stress busting, right? These two herbs would be a great choice. Either one of these two herbs would be a great choice to use for like a bee sting or any kind of venomous insect to kind of help. Because these plants have chelating substances in there, which means chelating, it draws out, it binds things to itself and draws it out. So a poultice is something that can be made either easy or more complicated. You can make it as easy or as complicated as you like. So I'm going to show you a comfrey leaf of the comfrey that I water at home. See, this is what it looks like when you neglect it. This is what it looks like when you actually water it, right? And it's the same for the plantain leaf, as you can imagine. Now, plantain looks a little bad now because it's not a warm weather herb, but do you see the difference in size in these leaves? That's a plantain leaf of a plantain that I actually water. And so I have a huge one in a pot at home for using it for purposes like that, and the same with the comfrey. Comfrey I have grow in many places because it's a good compost herb. You know, if you need some fertilizer and you run out of store-bought fertilizer, I just throw a few comfrey leaves in my blender, blend it up and throw it under the plant, and it's like a fertilizer application basically. So it has many, many uses. Now, touch that comfrey leaf, be careful. If you tend to have allergies to plants, you'll notice that it's kind of hairy and rough. And it's not nice to the touch. So you would never assume that this plant is really good for skin and, you know. Yeah, you would never think that. This plant, comfrey, has really all the same qualities as aloe vera. Yeah, you would never think that, because aloe vera is kind of slippery and nice and smooth, right? And this is like, oh God, hairy and coarse. So you would never think, but they actually have pretty much the same qualities. But the thing is, because that comfrey is so hairy, and some people even have allergies to that hair, you have to make a preparation with it before you use it, because of that. So with the plantain, that's not the issue. Plantain is smooth. So what you could do, the simplest compress you can make in the field is you take a plantain leaf, you chew it up, chew it into a ball and put it on your bite.
Is that what you're
That's
gonna do?
That's a poultice or compress. And then if you have to go somewhere, if you can't just sit there all day, then what you would do is you would have somebody help you. Just put some saran wrap over the material and just keep it there with saran wrap, put a piece of tape on there, and then leave it on there as long as you can, you know. Eventually it'll fall off after a couple hours, and that's okay. Then you can either put a fresh one on, or maybe it has already done its job. It works really well. You can make it, of course, if you happen to be at home and near your kitchen, then you can simply put it in your food processor, and you can put it in the food processor with some water, make a slurry, and then you can add some ground flax seeds to it. And you know what ground flax seeds do when you add them to water? They swell up and make a gummy paste. So I like to use flax seeds to make poultices because they make it into a paste that adheres. It's kind of adhering to itself and to whatever you put it on. So you would, you know, put some ground flax seeds to your water and make a really thick slurry, like a thick soup, and add just enough ground flax seeds to it that it sticks, that's a sticky paste, and then put it on. So we're gonna do a little on Sonia in a minute.
Are you gonna chew it up and stick it
No,
on?
I'm not gonna do that to you, but you get the idea. Chewing it up is sort of the field method, and you can do it yourself. But this is an old leaf, so I'm not gonna have you chew it because it, you know, has water spots on and all that. But since I was in the kitchen this morning, I had the opportunity to take that hairy, unpleasant feeling comfrey leaf, and I put it in the food processor with just a little bit of olive oil, not much. I would have normally used water. If I would have used it right away, I would have put it in there with water and flaxseed and then put it on. But since I knew it would be in a car for hours, if I had put the water and the flaxseed in, it would have turned into cement by now. So I didn't do that. So I used just a little olive oil, okay, just to keep it fresh until I was going to show you. So I have a spoon somewhere. Where did I put my spoon? So I'm going to give you just a little bit of that so you can see, you feel none of the hairiness of this. Just try it, and all of a sudden that hairy thing, it feels totally smooth after it's been in a food processor with a little bit of olive oil, no hairiness, nothing. It feels very gelatinous and actually very soothing. So you can, I'm going to give it to everybody else to feel, and I'm going to put it on your arm. Just a little bit. Do you want to test a little? So you can see that hairy leaf has turned into something pretty smooth that you can throw it away when you're done with it.
You're gonna rub it into your hands. It'll probably be good.
Well, it still has the material. You don't want to get it all over your clothes because it'll stain, you know.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Oh. Just take it in your, I just wanted you to feel it and see that it
How
actually
does it feel?
doesn't feel like the hairy leaf, you know. And
Okay.
Oh, there's that
so
paste
what
is
we're gonna do now,
wonderful paste.
Sounds good.
we're gonna make a little compress to put on Sonia. So I'm not gonna use all of it. I'm just gonna use a little bit. So normally you wouldn't need the olive oil. I just put it in as a preservative. So I'm using, just imagine that's a little ground up comfrey, and we're gonna add.
But it works to have the olive oil.
Yeah, it works though. I'm gonna add a little water.
Yeah.
Instead of water, I'm gonna add some tea because I don't have any water right here. So we're just gonna use some tea, which is extra beneficial, right? And now I'm gonna add a little flaxseed. Where did I put my flaxseed? Here. And we don't need much. When you wait with the flaxseed a little, you know, you wait 5 minutes and it's gonna,
Be all gelatinous.
yeah, it's gonna turn into a paste. So while this is hardening, while this is swelling up a little bit, maybe you want a little more. While this is swelling up, I want to show you one other ingredient that's usually used instead of flaxseed. And that's slippery elm bark powder. This is slippery elm bark powder. And that is often used to make poultices. It does the same as flaxseed. It kind of swells up in water and turns it into a malleable paste. I always have that around just for that purpose. Flaxseed I usually end up eating, so very often I'm out of flaxseed and I always have that, right? You can use that just in the same way as you would flaxseed. So I don't know if I want to wait that long till this swells up, so we're going to add a little more now. The reason why it's not swelling up as fast as it normally would is because of the olive oil. If this would just be water, the flax seeds would soak up the water instantly, and within 2 minutes that would be hard. But because I've added olive oil to that herb, the flaxseed have a much harder time soaking up what little water's in there because the olive oil is in the way. So that's why I have to use so much. Normally you would never use that much. Just so for your information. It's, yeah, now it starts getting there. See that? When it turns into that kind of, that's kind of what we want. We want it even a little firmer than that. And if it wasn't for the olive oil, it would already be way too firm. But because of the oil, we're going to use all the flaxseed to get it to the consistency we want. And then it's basically like chewing gum consistency. I'm going to put it on your foot so you can wash it off in the foot bath, right?
I'm liking my feet in this one.
Yeah. So let's say she had a just overcrossed. Put that leg over the other one. So let's just say you had a bee sting here, right?
Okay.
Let's imagine she had a bee sting here. See the gloppy stuff we have now? This is the consistency you want. And we're gonna put a little on there. And you can see because of that consistency, it tends to stay there. It's not falling off. And you want to let that go around so you see what that looks like. And I'm just gonna do the quick and dirty way. Yeah, and then I'd take if I was in the field, I would take a bandana and just wrap a bandana around that to make it, to make it stick there, right? And you could just sit there for like, half an hour or till your bee sting feels better. So this is what's called a poultice. And it's totally underused, but very effective for skin irritations, especially insect caused. It could be something else. It could be some allergy to, I don't know, something you found in your garden. Any type of skin irritation, eczema, whatever. This is a great thing to do.
Comfrey.
Yeah. People have traditionally used poultices even for broken bones and things like that. This is called comfrey, but it also used to be called bone set. And this name is not used anymore because, it's like practicing medicine without a license if you say that. And in all fairness, your broken bone is not just simply going to magically fuse just because you put that herb on. But having said that, that was used to help broken bones heal faster. And the way it was used was in form of poultices like that. So, it's just one more tool in your toolkit you can use. Yeah, and this poultice, of course, can be done with all kinds of herbs. In this case, we have used, this is a comfrey one right now. You could have done it with that. You could have just chewed up a plantain leaf and slapped it on there. As you can see, the saran wrap is optional. It's just to hold it in place. If you're out in the field, like let's say you're hiking and a bee stings you, and you don't have a plantain leaf with you, but you find an arrowleaf plantain somewhere, because they grow literally everywhere. You chew it up and you slap it on there. Even so you don't have saran wrap, if you chew it up with enough saliva, it'll stick there for long enough to actually make you feel better. You'll see, try it out sometime, And I had a friend who is no longer with us, but he always said, you know, when I'm hiking and that happens, I never have the herb that you recommended handy. He said, I'll just go there and take any herb that looks good and slap it on there. I said, well, I would not do that, okay? Because, you know, there is a lot of poisonous plants out there.
Right.
And you could seriously actually cause a skin rash by doing that and getting the wrong. So one thing I want to really emphasize is when you use herbs for like what we would call a medicinal purpose, really learn to identify your herbs. And nowadays that's much easier than it used to be because we have all kinds of apps now that can help us. Even though I have to say, I haven't used them recently, but when they first came out, most of them were really bad. They would misidentify at least 50% of the time. So do not totally rely on an app, you know, only in an emergency, right? I would never rely on any of these apps because I can't tell you how many times they told me the wrong. I knew what the plant was and I checked it with the app just to see what it would say. And it came up with the wrong thing half of the time. So do not, like when you said it's mullein, right? The app probably would say it's mullein. Yeah.
I'm Helen Keller was
because
my
they
mama.
look so similar. They do look similar, and unless you really know the plant from experience, you could totally mistake it.
Can we divide it so if somebody wants one of this and one of that?
I would love a plantain.
There you go.
Yeah, well, you know, I have more at home, so next time I come to Lakeport, why don't I drop some off here with Sonia? Would you be okay?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you guys can come here and pick it up.
And divide them and
Lovely. Oh, thank
we'll take
you.
some and leave some.
I have at least 3 or more that I don't need. I'll pot them up and leave them with Sonia, and I'll let her know when I do
When I
that.
come for you too.
And then she can let you know and you can pick it up. What
How
about
often
that?
are you in the office?
Every 2 weeks usually. Every 2 weeks on average.
If I go in there and leave a note? And
I will let Sonia know when I do, and then she can.
Well, I'm just saying you're a wonderful teacher
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
very thorough.
She has your contact info now, so she can.
Very thorough. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just text you when she's.
So that's pretty much it for today. I don't want to confuse you anymore. I think that's enough material for a little, right, for you to play with.
Oh,
Any questions?
that's great.
Can we use coconut oil? for
Yes, of course you
alcohols?
can use coconut oil. Now you know that coconut oil gets solid really easily at room temperature in the winter, which can be a desirable thing, right? So sometimes, but I make some of these preparations with coconut oil just because coconut oil is antibacterial and it also now this is a fresh herb in oil. What have I already taught you today? Let's
Not
check
to
if you
dry
paid
it,
attention.
To dry it first before putting in oil. because-
Well, for a poultice, no. For a
For a
poultice,
poultice.
you can use it fresh. But remember, you're using it
Fresh,
that
right
very
then.
day fresh. You would never store that for more than a day or two, a fresh herb in oil. Like in the fridge for a day, no longer than that, I would use that, okay? If you have an herb in oil for longer than a day, it needs to be dried, remember? Like an herbal oil and a poultice are two totally different things. An herbal oil is something that you want to use for an extended amount of time and make a salve out of that's going to sit around probably for a half a year or longer. So the herb needs to be dried. But a poultice is used literally right after you make it. So that's why you can use the fresh herb. And the oil is not even needed in there. The only reason I used the oil is because I wasn't using the product right at home when I made it. Do you know what I mean? If I would have made that here, I would have used water instead of oil. The oil was only necessary to kind of keep it moist, keep it from looking awful by the time I get here. Basically, that's the only reason I even used the oil. But it's not necessary for a poultice. A poultice is usually the herb with just enough water and flaxseed or slippery elm to make a paste, right?
I had a gardener had asked about painful hands after gardening and
Yeah.
what to use in a solve or
So
something.
you can
I had gotten some oil, COPAIBA. I don't know what how to spell
COPAIBA.
BA.
Copaiba. That sounds like a Brazilian
Yes, I think
Brazilian
so.
herb.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is
Now,
that something that
yeah.
actually
I work mostly with herbs that are easy to grow, that are either native or are easy to grow in your garden. I'm not a huge friend of using stuff from all the other end of the world unless it's absolutely necessary. You know what I mean? Because a lot of time you find that something that literally grows next to your door does the same thing than some expensive ingredient that you're importing from Brazil or God knows where. So the herbalism I practice and teach is mostly with local stuff. And there's exceptions, don't get me wrong. There's things you really can't get here.
I just was wondering if it's actual something that would help painful, you know.
Well,
arthritis,
you're the
or-
judge by using it. Is it helping you or not?
It's not for me, it's up for my husband.
Oh,
His
okay.
hands swell up and-
Well, you
I'd
could
say
make
comfrey.
yourself that comfrey compress and
Comfrey.
stick your hands, you know, make a whole tub of it. If you have a big
Yeah.
plant, I would make like a
don't, but I
bowl
could
up
get
to here
one,
and just stick my hand in there.
Okay.
It's like a spa, you know, like in a spa treatment where you have your hands in the soapy water and
Yes,
somebody is like doing your hair while you're having hands. Yeah, you know, have somebody do your hair while you have your hands in that comb. Yes.
Thank you.
Or a lot of the times when I have really bad hands from doing something in the garden, or the other day I was making I was making a preparation out of hot chili peppers and I forgot to put my gloves on. And when I was done, my hands were literally on fire, right? So I took this healing salve that I made out of these ingredients and put it on really thick on my hands and then put some cotton gloves over it and just slept in it like that. So that's basically a poultice on my hand that is held on the hand with a cotton glove. See, you can use a salve as a poultice if you put it on thick enough and keep it on there, then it works as a poultice, right?
Great.
So most of these preparations have many different applications that your imagination is the limit, you know? And the only thing where you have to be careful is with internal and external, okay? Comfrey is generally not used internal anymore for humans, and I can't tell you, but there was one person who had liver problems with it 30 years ago, and ever since it's not allowed anymore internally. Don't ask me if it's really a problem, but it's always better to err on the side of caution, okay? They still use it as a feed for livestock in many places, so animals seem to have no problem eating it, you know? It's super nutritious. I mean, it's obviously full of, but it may be hard on your liver. I don't know. I would not use it internally. Whereas the plantain, you can put a few leaves in your smoothie, you know? It's a chelator, sort of like cilantro is a chelator that can draw heavy metals out of your system. Plantain is very similar. It can draw things you don't want out of your system and you can eat it. It's perfectly safe to eat. You can put it in your salad, you can put it in your smoothie. And like I said, these are edible, the seeds are edible, you know? So it's a handy plant with all parts edible, right? Any other questions?
No.
You're all confused now.
I have the preparation.
Let's see.
What do you think of Vicks Vapor Rub rubbing your, putting on your feet and then putting socks on it and letting them soak in a day or two?
Well, Vicks Vapor Rub is something I never liked, but some people love it. And if it makes you feel better,
Why don't you like it?
it's too mentally for me. I'm not a big friend of menthol
scarred for
smell.
life.
Yeah.
bring
I
back
was,
that
as a
memory.
child, I was doused with menthol gargle with Vicks Vapor Rub at every opportunity. I mean, my grandmother literally walked around with a tub of Vicks Vapor Rub in her hand, and every time I had anything wrong with her, she was slathering. Anything wrong with me, she was slathering on. So I'm a little bit traumatized from Vicks Vapor Rub. So I'm not a fan of it, but a lot of people love it,
was
you know.
referring to the petroleum in it. To
Well, I
soften
also
the
don't
feet
use
and-
I don't use petroleum,
use petroleum.
products
Yes,
in my
that's
and it's mostly because number one, there's better stuff. Right.
There is.
Yeah, I mean beeswax is a
Oh.
thickener I use for myself, and beeswax in itself is a healing product. It's not just a thickener; it has healing properties in itself. So why wouldn't you use the best ingredients you can?
I'm
I
gonna
mean,
start.
petroleum
I'm gonna change.
jelly is not necessarily harmful, but it has nothing benign, nothing good in it, other than that it makes things stick. That's the only good thing it's got going for itself, and it's cheap, you know. What petroleum does, any petroleum product, including baby oil, which is basically petroleum oil, it clogs up your pores. Okay. whereas, you know, natural oils soak into your skin, whereas petroleum products do not soak in. They just sit on the surface and clog up your pores. That's another reason why I don't use it in medicinal products, because you want the good properties of the herbs to go in through your skin. If you bind it in a petroleum jelly base, it'll just sit on top, you know? Yeah.
So, is local beeswax better? Like eating local honey is better?
Well, honestly, I am not a stickler about that. You know, if you're taking something internally, yes, local is better, simply because the local bees deal with the local weeds and they create antibodies to the local weed allergens. So if you eat local honey, it'll help you with your allergies. If you eat non-local honey, it will likely not help you with your allergies. But if you use beeswax externally as a, you know, thickener for a salve, that wouldn't be a criterion, because, you know, I mean, any good beeswax will be good. It doesn't need to be local for that. Even though if you have a source of local beeswax, great, but not necessary in that case, you know. It's more important for internal things like honey. Yeah. And also because I have to confess that even though I do sometimes just buy chunks of beeswax from local beekeepers, when I make small amounts of salve preparations, it's very hard to cut chunks of local beeswax into the small amounts that you need for a salve. It's almost impossible to do. So that's why I buy beeswax granulated in little granules. That way I can simply use a scale for letters and weigh the exact amount that I need to make just like a couple of little pots of salve, you know what I mean? Which is with a chunk of beeswax practically impossible to do. You always end up using either too much or not enough, and then you have a big mess trying to cut it up. So it's purely for practical reasons. Yeah.
And for these salt scrubs, can you use Epsom salts too? Epsom salt
Yeah.
or sugar scrubs?
I would actually, I would use a good sea salt.
Okay.
See, anytime the better these single ingredients are, the better the final product will be. I think that's pretty clear. It's the same in cooking. The better the ingredients are that you use, the better the overall meal will be. And for the salt scrub, I use either like Celtic gray sea salt, which is salt where literally just the seawater has been evaporated from it, or you can use the pink Himalayan salt or whatever. You know, what I like about it is these are salts that still have all the 76 or so minerals that naturally occur in salt. When you buy table salt at the grocery store, all these 76 minerals have been extracted and sold as fertilizer, and all you're left with is the sodium chloride. Table salt in the store is pure sodium chloride. There's no other minerals in it. And that's why it's not good for you. It's not balanced. In nature, salt occurs with 76 other minerals, and there's a reason for it. Because you need those, you know.
And also they add to it to make it sprinkle better.
And they add anti-caking agents and God knows what else they add to it. So a natural salt is obviously better because, like I said, your foot sole is absorbing that, you know, or anywhere on your skin is absorbing it. I'm not saying it's detrimental if you only have regular table salt there. It's not detrimental. You're still using good herbs and you're going to rinse it off anyway. You don't want to leave that on for too long, you know. The same is with the oil in that salt scrub. The oil you use, of course, you want it to be a beneficial oil. Don't use petroleum oil, obviously, you know.
Never again.
Yeah. Even so, I know guys who use motor oil on their skin, okay? Because they think it's a manly thing to do. A friend of mine from Los Angeles, as an aftershave, he used isopropyl rubbing alcohol as an aftershave. Because he thought that was a manly thing to do. Hey, to each his own. Right?
Mercy.
I don't recommend it.
Who told you about me earlier? The alcohol, the oil.
Yeah.
Somebody's talking about me?
Yeah, probably. You know, maybe he's related to you. Yeah.
What
Did I
would be
leave
the benefits
anything
of
in?
like a sugar scrub? Would
Well,
that be a little bit more hydrating, or
It's probably a little bit more, well, it's at least not as dehydrating as salt scrub.
okay?
Sugar would not be so much invigorating. It would be more soothing.
Okay.
The salt scrub is an invigorating thing. You know, the sugar would be a more soothing thing. I personally, and this has nothing to do with invigorating or soothing, I personally don't use sugar so much because sugar feeds bacteria, as we know, right?
Okay.
So I don't like to apply things with sugar in them to myself necessarily, because if I have the wrong bacteria on my skin and I add some sugar, it's just gonna encourage them, you know what I mean? Whereas salt is antibacterial, right? So for that reason alone, I prefer salt in it.
Yeah.
That's all.
And if you're so sweet, the bees come after you. And anything else that wants.
But I'm not saying don't use it. It's not my favorite. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Other than that, you know, you have most of the information that I said and things that I didn't have time to say in your handouts. In the culinary handout, it's good because it tells you a little bit about how to freeze, how to dry, that you should never can pesto because it's not acidic enough. Yeah.
Oh.
Things like that.
But you
Food
can freeze
safety.
it.
You can freeze it. I freeze
Like,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
I like to freeze it in ice cube
cube
trays,
trays, yeah.
so you have a little amount that you need. And as I already said, or you know, if somebody hasn't heard it, pesto you can make out of just about any herb, any culinary herb, right? It's not limited to basil. I mean, in the winter when there's no basil, I make pesto out of oregano, sage, parsley. I mean, you can make pesto out of anything, you know.
Nice.
Of course, Italians would cringe if they heard me right now. So, but you know, seriously, you know, if I would tell an Italian that we have, you know, Cleveland sage pesto, they would cringe. But I do it. Yeah. So that'll give you a little bit of something to play with, and yeah, I'll drop off plants with Sonia. Okay, that's it for today.
Let's give
Have
her a
fun
big
with it.
hand. Yay! Thank you.